Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all our audience, wherever you're dialing in from. Welcome to Women in Hospitality Travel Tech, presenting Diversity and Inclusion Talks, episode number 5. So, thank you so much all for joining us here today. My name is Devi Virdi. I'm head of diversity and inclusion for WHTT, and I'm incredibly excited to be here today. So today's episode, episode 5, the conversation is about the impact of well-being and mental health on the D&I agenda. Now, our panelists are going to be in conversation for around 40 minutes, and we will involve questions from you, our audience, during this time. So we would love to receive some questions on the topic, which is so on trend and so relevant in today's current crisis. So quite frankly, employee well-being has become an increasing priority, right, across organizations during this health pandemic. And what's surprising, somewhat for me, that it's taken a global crisis to ensure that well-being and mental health is front and center of mind. Right. Now, without further ado, I'd like to now introduce and welcome today's amazing super panelists that I have here today. I'm going to start off with Megan. Megan, welcome.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you here. So, Megan is dialing in all the way from Minneapolis. Megan is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a professional speaker, a consultant, and author of Super Commuter Couples Staying Together When a Job Keeps You Apart. Megan is a sought after speaker and writer on topics including workplace mental health, burnout, road warriors, business travel wellness, and perfectionism, and has been interviewed as an expert by publications including the BBC, SHRM, Forbes, MarketWatch, and CBS Evening News. Great to have you here with us today, Megan.
Thanks. I'm excited.
So, secondly, we have Lindsay. Lindsay, welcome.
Hi. Bonjour.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Devi.
Pleasure. So Lindsay is actually dialing us from southern France. And I love this because actually most of us are in different parts of the world here. So Lindsay has recently founded Meraki. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Correct, yeah.
Perfect. So Lindsay has actually spent the past 20 years traveling the globe, working for some of the biggest names in the hospitality and wellness space. Lindsay most recently was the global director for well-being for the luxury division of Accor, including brands such as Raffles, Fairmont, and the Orient Express. She was responsible for each of the individual's brand global well-being strategy, including bring the concept together, the brand creation, the programming, project management design, and the pre-opening, as well as bringing about the partnerships and collaboration of the wellness spa and the fitness space. So self-described and non-traditionalist, Lindsay makes it her mission to ensure that each project, has a strong differentiator and strategy at its heart. She's been a judge, in fact, for 6 consecutive years for the World Spa and Wellness Awards, and a contributor to several industry publications, as also a public speaker at some key events. Now, Lindsay founded Meraki with a mission to create conscious, collaborative projects that continue to put wellness on the map. And after spending 13 years in Dubai, she's recently moved to the south of France and is dedicating her life to well-being. That's amazing, Lindsay.
Thank you,
I'm inspired.
Thank you so much.
And we then have Chris. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Chris is an advocate in the field of travel wellness and healthy jet lag solutions for frequent travelers. His initial training as a naturopathic nutritional therapist and in neurolinguistic programming. So having spent 20 years as a flight attendant, right, flying in excess of 100,000 miles with BA while serving as a wellbeing and inclusion advisor, Chris has a hands-on approach which bridges the divide between the theory and the practice. Chris's enthusiasm for travel and wellness was born in a need to stay healthy while running a business and flying around full time. The demands of his work led to him seeking a healthy, full, sustainable flying solution and enabled him to thrive in the face of a busy schedule and a physically demanding job, really. It also led to the creation of his six-step proprietary methodology, which he teaches his clients, and his book from 2016 called Farewell Jet Lag. Now, in the current climate, Chris has focused on combining the science of nutritional therapy with clinical practice experience to serve flyers and non-flyers. And Chris operates through the business he founded, No Jet Stress, which is a consultancy and a coaching clinic. Chris is also a member of the Complementary Therapist Association. As a travel wellness advocate, he blogs, posts, and podcasts, and has appeared in a variety of shows and platforms across the internet. So great to have you with us here today, Chris.
Really good to be here. I can't wait to get started.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Matt. Matt, thank you for being with us here today.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Devi, for inviting me.
So Matt has over 25 years experience of working across the global corporate business space within a wide range of senior and executive leadership roles, covering from training, sales, account management, personal development, and project management, working across all global markets. Now, in 2016, following a personal mental health challenge, Matt changed his focus and was committed to helping others who were struggling with the demands of the world. Simpila was born. So Simpila is dedicated to making a difference in the world and enhancing the awareness, the education, and support of mental health across companies and society. In 2017, it was really interesting. Matt was working with friends in their company called Happyful, and Matt was the publisher of Happyful magazine, the first magazine that was devoted to promoting positive mental health. This is actually quite staggering. The magazine now has an excess of 100,000 subscribers. Wow. Matt has been invited to speak at many global conferences, and in fact, as well as events on mental health, traveler well-being, and just being human, right? In October 2019, Matt delivered a TEDx talk called 24-Hour Human. And in 2020, so this year, Matt was recognized by Buying Business Travel Magazine's Hot List 2020 as a global influencer, alongside major travel suppliers and the likes of Greta Thunberg, focusing his energy to support the impact business travel can have on mental well-being. Matt is also the co-founder of the Global Business Travel Wellbeing Community, to which myself and some of the others on the panel here today are also part of this community. Matt has many roles and is a mental health trainer, a champion consultant, Samaritan volunteer, a husband, father to 2 daughters, an amateur golfer, and a chief dog walker. Brilliant. So one thing Matt always guarantees is that he will be genuine and authentic in everything he does to help others. So welcome. I'm so delighted to have you all here today. And I guess to kick off the episode, I'd like to just do some scene setting here, right? And I think it would be great for me to just share, what do I think, well-being really means, right? And personally to me. So certainly in my experience across the sort of hospitality space that I've been in, the travel tech space in the last 20 years, for me, it's about having, well-being is about having a personal sense of happiness, right? And enjoyment, okay? Around your individual lives. That's how I see it. And what's really interesting is in corporate sectors, the well-being, right? Well-being has been engaged. Organizations have been engaged in this space sort of for the last 10 to 15 years. They've been dabbling in this space, so to speak. It's a difference of investment and how seriously they are now taking it. However, I see that there are 4 main buckets, right, when it comes to well-being. And of course, the one that has a direct impact on D&I is mental health, right? We all know that. Second is the physical health. Third is the social health, and that's more about, for me, how much you're interacting, right, with people, and the energy you can get by having those amazing conversations, right, with people and having those great relationships. And I guess most recently, we've seen financial health, right, that's come about. So, this really lends me on to the very first question. Being such a hot topic today and the sort of, the crisis that we're currently in. But, during the current COVID pandemic, employee well-being has become, increasing priority, right, across companies. How do you see this impacting, and not just across travel programs, right? Because we know where travel sort of hits at the moment, but how do you see this impacting now and in the future? And I guess with that question, I would also add, actually, what can companies do to raise the awareness of mental health, right, and well-being? So, Megan, I thought this would be a great question, perhaps, for you to open up with.
Sure. So I feel like with anything, it's a multi-pronged approach. Communication is top. And one thing I've been talking with companies and employees and management about is really conveying expectations, and because they're going to have to change, especially right now, but also just simple things like letting your employees know what resources are available. So do you have an employee assistance program? Do the employees understand how to access it, that it extends to their immediate family in most cases, and usually there's no charge to use them. So a combination of education, acceptance, but I think the biggest piece is really top-down leadership. Like, you can say you're focused on well-being and mental health, but if your leadership and the culture of your company really doesn't support that, it's never going to work.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't agree more. And I think this is where the whole investment piece comes in, right?
Yep.
Matt, did you want to elaborate this? I mean, and also, now with COVID, investment is so key, right? Particularly in the mental health space.
Yeah, you would think so, right? That's the sort of, is that the reality though? I think that's, I'm, like I said, I'm a realist. I say it as it is, and I think one of the challenges is mental health's become popular now, in the language, in the conversation. Yeah, I'm still not convinced that everybody's embracing what it really means, because I talk about the balance. So when you talk about your definition of well-being, for me, it's all about balancing the positives to the negatives. So we only really, and think about this as a thought, managers and leaders tend to only talk about mental health when there's a problem. And that's what we have to change. We need to talk about mental health positively as well as negatively. So if you talk to managers today and ask them, when was the last time you had a conversation with your employee, whether that's traveling, whether that's in any setting, and you asked them how they were feeling and really wanted to know and understand, if they turn around and said, I'm okay, you would leave it. You wouldn't do anything with it. If they turn around and said, I'm struggling, you'd be like, oh, I've got to talk about this, and really so it's all about the negatives. Let's try and reframe some of that. I think now's a great chance to do that. I do a lot of work with companies, of course. Budgets is quite an interesting one because a lot of stuff's free. Let's not be bogged down by this thought that everything costs money. Being kind to people doesn't cost money, and so companies need to embrace more of these thoughts. I saw an interesting question about working from home that I think we should get to at some point as well in some of this discussion, because the world has changed. We have a much more remote community of our employees, and it's become a little bit harder for a lot of people to recognize when things aren't going so well. Lots of things to think about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right? Because there's been a huge drive on mental health, well-being. And going back to Chris's question that's come in, right? As people are more, they're in the remote world, they need more care, right? People need a safe space to talk, right? So the question from Chris is, it's in a world of where we're currently working from home, what can businesses do to ensure their teams are switching off at the end of the working day? Chris, do you want to take that question?
Gladly, yes. What I would actually like to do is actually use a case study. It might be a case study that some are familiar with, but there's a really popular story that's told about Google. And they had this team out there in California that was really ready to go full tilt and produce the Google that we all know and love today. And the challenge that they had was that these people were so committed to the work that they were doing that they were willing to pretty much work 24/7. Enter stage left the gentleman who's now known as Jolly Goodfellow. He started a mindfulness practice. And that mindfulness practice was what eventually became a core program within Google to help all these people who were seriously A-types of the A-types, these go-getters, balance themselves out to be able to achieve, but not burn out, to sustainably achieve the goals that Google set for them. And that was one of the many success stories that you could look at when you think of corporate wellness programs. So we don't necessarily all need I mean, at the end of the day, this gentleman, I believe he was a programmer. He left programming and was asked to solely focus on that for Google. We don't, depending on the size of the company and the makeup of the workforce, maybe that's not necessary. But like Megan has said, and pretty much like what Matthew's alluded to as well, it doesn't have to cost money. And as long as we get the community aspects and we really do communicate and the culture right, then we can be creative enough to bring in those types of tools on large scales or smaller scales as are needed. So specifically, people have to start looking at the human being behind the function. What Matt is talking about there in part is also this idea that the question that's posed to the employee tends to come from the standpoint of, you need to produce X for me, and if I have to ask you why, it's en route to getting X from you, not because I actually care about you, which is a bit harsh, but sometimes people are acting from the function rather than them being human. So we need to start getting into the details of the communities we have and the cultures that really underpin these workplaces in view of what's happening right now.
Thanks so much, Chris. And Lindsay, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you know, if you sort of look at from a hospitality point of view, right? And I think we touched on this when we had our pre-call, and given, you know, the state of the travel sector, the hospitality sector, right, where you are today, you know, there are so many people, you know, you see it on LinkedIn every day. There are people losing their jobs, right, of no fault of their own. You know, and it's also impacting the business model, right? So from a business model, you know, where we touched on it, this whole people light model, right? How does this new environment really, you know, how is this then, how do companies raise awareness of this, and how does it impact the person?
I think a lot of it is going to come from the talent and culture or the HR department. They're really there and they're leading by example. I think it's not difficult for companies in general these days to put together whether it's a booklet or some type of resource of the different resources that are available for people. So that could be access to you know, physical fitness, it could be access to meditation, to yoga channels. I know we had put together things like interesting podcasts to listen to. I know about 2 years ago, Global Wellness Institute, it was announced as one of the global trends that workplace wellness was actually, you know, that was really the hot topic and the hot trend coming up. Little did we know that COVID would actually have such a big effect on it. But we had seen some interesting companies pivot from that and take advantage of that. And at the same time, I think we saw some companies who would actually put a block on people's emails. So at a certain time during the day, they actually couldn't access their emails and they couldn't respond, which I thought was a really great way of allowing people to be able to shut off. And I've done some webinars during the COVID period, and people were saying, look, I'm working from home and I'm sitting at my dining room table, and it's just so easy for me to keep working. But I think people just need to be diligent about that, and companies need to really support this work-life balance.
Thanks, Lindsay. Matt, did you want to add something onto that?
Yes, please. Yeah, I'd love to. I was talking last week with somebody around this whole concept of switching off, and you know, we get fixated, and you know, I've got this big thing about time. Time is such an important and critical part of who we are. We waste a lot of our own time. We'd never really focus on the investments that we make with time. But what I found fascinating was we're all fixated on switching off at the end of the day, and I mean, so my perspective now is, well, why can't you switch off during the day sometimes as well? Because we feel like we just never have that disconnection, and you know, switching off at night's hard for a lot of people now, but also turning it on in the morning, it doesn't need to be, because you're at work. Most people now are working from home or from a remote or virtual location, and it's hard to have that disconnection between. I try to put into my diary now times during the day to switch off, and it doesn't have to be hours. It can just be half an hour. Just switch off from the work and go and have a walk. do something else. I think that's where companies can start to encourage change in the way that they expect people to work. I think they have to anyway, and even the same when we think about the travel industry and the way that people travel. I never had time where people said switch off, turn it off, go and do things for you. Nobody ever encouraged any of that. So lots of different thoughts in there, but I'm just one of these people that says, don't just think of switching off at the end of the day, switch off for a bit during the day, take time, recover. It's really important, and especially right now, we are struggling more, and we will struggle a lot more with this thought of I need to keep working, I need to keep working, I need to keep working.
And do you think, and this is for all of us, but do you think that the fact that because, so many people, yes, Europe's just going through another lockdown, the UK, well, England has started today, the lines of your professional and personal life are completely blurred, right? To that point that because you're in your home environment, do you think that also makes it difficult, right? For an individual to go, okay, I need to try and invest in, right, it's I don't know, X amount of time, I need to go for a walk, but because I'm zoomed out or I'm Google Hangout, whatever you want to call the technology that we had, that everybody's on these platforms, that, I love the fact that we're having this engagement, but, I personally, the last 6 months for me, I'm being like a yo-yo, okay? I have good days, I have bad days, right? I've had days where I've just bawled, literally bawled, right? And it's pretty tough. And I sort of think, Christ, if I'm going through it, everybody's going to be going through some of that, right? There's nobody who can turn around and say, hey, you know what? I've had a pretty good ride through COVID and I'm doing all right. I wouldn't believe that for a second. But I think from an impact, from a company employee stance point of view is actually, one of my top tips to organizations is actually, don't be afraid to start, right? You might fail in whatever you choose to do, right? Whether that's starting to have that conversation, right, around mental health in your organization, but don't be afraid to start, because you're absolutely right. Lindsay, Matt, Megan, you've all touched on this, and Chris, is the fact that, now with COVID, this investment is so incredibly needed. But is buzzword is that a buzzword, right? Is mental health a sort of new buzzword given the current times that we live in?
Well, I think all that speaks to kind of the human aspect. Does anybody really expect all of us to keep that pace up indefinitely? Like, it's not sustainable. So I feel like from the flip side, what COVID has taught us is that it's not, and you're able to see and really feel where people are breaking down. And so I feel like it's going to bring a lot of opportunity to make adjustments, to lower expectations. I've challenged, people in the talks that I've done during this too, like, are there little ways to change your habits, right? Don't just pick up the phone first thing in the morning. Like I say, build in little reminders in your calendar. If you find that a certain time of day is more difficult for you, can you just have your calendar ping you and say, go for a walk, step outside, have some water, or even just a little affirmation to kind of shift that focus. And I think a big part of it is, if you break down anxiety, it's all about the fear of the unknown and lack of control. And we're sitting in that right now. We're really kind of just floating in an ocean of uncertainty, and there's no land that we can see. So what are we going to do? Can we make the best of this situation and just normalize that we're struggling? So if you can just start those conversations and normalize the fact that this is hard, and share and collaborate how people are dealing with this and connecting through it, I think that'll go a long ways.
Yeah, and love it. Collaboration is so key. Sorry, go on, Chris.
So I also think when you think of the mindset, people wanting to power through, I know from working with city clients that they tend to, the male ego will not necessarily allow people to admit that as a weakness, which is something that does have to shift. And I think that's also a bit true of the mental health space, and men being able to talk about it as much as maybe women can. So addressing that and giving yourselves permission. You're in the confines of your own home. So I think one should be able to do that, but it takes a spotlight on that for people to be able to give themselves permission, I think, a bit.
Do you think there's a stigma around talking about mental health?
Definitely,
right?
Definitely.
There's not even a stigma, a weakness, right? That actually I'm not built to be a superhero, right? So actually, people haven't seen me, crumble. And so if I talk about it, I'm perceived by somebody else that I'm actually weak. and so therefore that's that stigma connotation that's behind it. I mean, I'd be really interested to understand, because I look at it and I personally think that there are challenges in the stigma from a cultural point of view.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not just across cultures, across countries. I look at the UK and I sort of think, okay, so the royal family here has sort of embraced, talking about, or they've got involved and started talking about mental health, which is great. It's one part. But I guess I'd like to sort of understand from each of you, what are your thoughts in terms of the whole stigma scenario when it comes to mental health, because there's a cultural element to it.
I think it's education. I genuinely feel that the biggest misconception is that we make our own assumptions. Because we think we know what it is, but we've never learned about it. We've never had education or awareness raising that really gives us insights. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges. I think about the different communities within communities. We've got the BAME and we've got the LGBTQ plus communities. We've got all these diverse communities out there, and they're all struggling in their own ways with the discussion of mental health. We see higher risk of things like suicide, with self-harm and so on, and the numbers are just going up. They're not going down. As much as we're talking about it, there is that sort of perverse thought that says, well, because we're talking about it now, there's more of it. But I don't think there is. I think it's because we're talking about it, we know that it exists now, and now we're becoming aware. So this is building this awareness element into this, and I think that is critical for organizations and companies to embrace. Awareness days are going on all the time. Yesterday in the UK was National Stress Awareness Day. It's currently Men's Health Month. We've got Kindness Day coming up on the 13th of November. All these things are great opportunities for all businesses to just say, today we're going to practice kindness. We should be doing it every day, by the way, but today we're going to do it. So these are things that I think we're starting to understand. When we hear that depression is the second largest burden of disability on the planet, that surprises a lot of people. Why should it surprise people? We'd heard of cancer, we've heard of coronary issues, heart disease and things. We've heard of depression, but we didn't realize that it was such a big problem. So now we need to educate people, and that's how we get companies into this. We make them aware, we help them to share that awareness, and then we can grow from there. We're trying to grow, I see, sorry, I'm getting a little bit passionate about this subject, but it's my baby. We give lots of solutions, but we don't know why. And I think that's what we've got to try and redefine. With the business travel wellbeing community, we're trying to understand, what is travel wellbeing? What is travel wellbeing? We hear it, but it could be going to the gym. It could be eating well. It could be doing all these wonderful things. But it's more than just that. It's about you as a human. I love the fact that the word human's been used twice already, and I'm wearing my 24-hour humans t-shirt, because this is really, I had to do it. But this is what it comes down to. Irrespective of who you are, what position you have on the planet, it's really important to recognize we're all human first. We cannot get away from this. We're all humans. We all have 24 hours, and it's about helping support each other through crisis, through happiness, through, when you're enjoying it, I want to enjoy it with you. I genuinely do. And when you're struggling, I want to be right next to you, helping you through those struggles.
I think we also need to see like a lot more from the top. Like we said before, there needs to be some leading by example from the top. And I know, just as an example, I used to always, when I was going away on vacation, I made a point of saying, right, this is 10 days where I'm going away on retreat. And I would actually put on my out of office that said, in the spirit of well-being, and people knew I worked in the business, so they kind of expected it. I said, I'll be on retreat for the next 10 days. And unfortunately, I won't be touching my emails, but here's where I'm going. And I would leave links to it and let people dig into it. And the responses I got when I got back were so positive. And it started to encourage other people to kind of look at it from that perspective of, actually, it's okay for me to do that. It's okay for me to switch off. It's okay for me to remove myself from work. And people, I saw some of my colleagues were writing things like, I'm going on a vacation with my family, and during that time, I'm going to be spending time with my family. So I think when people start to lead by example, and they start to really put themselves forward, it will start to catch on, and people start to realize, like, actually, that is okay. It's okay to do that. So
it's all about boundaries.
Yeah.
Healthy boundaries.
But to your point about, to underline your point about stigma, I think when people think of mental health, the perception used to be it's the bad side of mental health that everyone takes to be the whole picture of mental health. And that is not the case. Mental health is, as Matthew said, the positive and the negative. So until that breaks, I think that stigma will still remain to a certain extent.
And
I think too, sorry if I can just say, You know, I run into this in the wellness space a lot. Over the last how many years has wellness just been wellness, 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 and now I'm seeing the word wellness on hand sanitizers. So there's this division and really this boundary of, you know, how do we create wellness in the most authentic form, and therefore
Sure.
it's not commercial. And I think that's what we're going to have to worry, or what we're going to need to look out for in terms of workplace wellness, because everyone has identified it as an opportunity, and an opportunity for companies usually becomes very commercial. And it's the same thing with mental health as well. So it's really that the industry can go two ways. They can either use it to their advantage and it becomes commercial, and then it gets worn out and it becomes washed away, or it actually becomes more authentic. So I think as more and more companies think about moving into this space, they need to think about moving into it from an authentic perspective, so that it actually makes an impact on companies and people want to take it on, rather than it just being about a commercial opportunity and a hashtag.
Well, and I think too, back to the idea of asking what employees are struggling with, and obviously you don't have to get too detailed, but that I think is where the diversity and inclusion piece comes in, because what is a struggle for one person might not be for another. So like when I was talking to businesses about their road warriors, I always mention, like, you know, if you have females in your company that you want to keep and want to continue to move forward, do you offer any resources like Milk Stork if they want to get back to work and they have to breastfeed while they're on the road? So just thinking about that, or even just the idea of, like, I mean, how many of you 2 years ago would talk to people like, oh, my boss says I can't work at home. That's not allowed at our company. Well, look at us now. Everybody's working from home. So just kind of get an idea of if that helps your employees' stress go down substantially because they can drop their kid at daycare a little bit later, or whatever the scenario is. Like, those tiny pieces may make a big difference for this person over here, but something else might be for somebody over there. So I think just really gathering information is probably a first step, so we're not trying to fix the parts that aren't broken and forgetting the ones that are.
It's really interesting because I'm doing a piece of work at the moment where we're actually going through the whole employment part of, you know, being with a company, and that starts from recruitment right at the beginning. You know, when you first walk through that door, how did you feel? You know, that's something that's very rarely captured. So your first impressions is a big thing. You will enjoy your job if you enjoyed that first day, but lots of people don't even think that way. So what we're doing, and it's back to that positives, negatives, break down every part. Break down the whole process. Interestingly, when I ask the question, do you give feedback to all candidates? Lots of companies say no, only to those ones that are shortlisted. Now, think about the impact you're actually doing to those people you're not employing and you're not intending to employ, but they're sat there. And we hear this all the time. I've applied for 300 jobs. I don't get any feedback. How demoralizing and you know, damaging potentially could that be? So just be kind, you know, be kind in that. But as you go through all those steps, you get into work, and it's about support, and it's about communication and change management and all. If you can look at all of those and say positives, you know, they're all positives and they will impact positively on the employment, that's good. But if you start ticking negatives against those, you need to address them. And I've just been doing this piece of work, and it's fascinating first wave results that we're seeing, because when you ask managers to rate and grade those elements, their interpretation of them are honest, because we've asked them to be honest, and they're really low. And they're really low in the way that they grade them. So we're talking -10 to +10, and most of them are in the minus numbers. And this is a reality that we're seeing across lots of organizations. So we have to listen and we have to address that, because mental health isn't one thing, it's a big thing.
It is a big thing, and it's really interesting, right, that they're doing this piece of work, Matt, because that's all about creating an inclusive culture, right? And in an organization, you know, from that point that you walk into the door, right, that whole piece about being an inclusive culture ties in with how well you're enjoying. So that whole well-being aspect impacts your engagement as an employee. That's where this all connects, right? That's where mental health sits so firmly. For me, I see it very much on that agenda, and it's managed by, you could say there's a piece that, you know, HR manages it. There's another piece that's managed differently by line managers, you know, but it is, you know, well-being and engagement drives that whole, you know, ultimately, if you're happy at work, you're going to do well. Right? It's not rocket science, really, is it? You know, and that's exactly it. You know, I sort of I know. Well,
I think people try to make it rocket science to make an industry out of it. I think it's easier if we just simplify everything. Hence the reason my company is called Simpila. Right? We've got to make it simpler. It's got to be easier. We're just making it too complicated.
I think, you know, it goes back to the point, Lindsay, you also said earlier on, you come to work as a whole person. Okay. We all come to work as a whole person. We're not just leaving parts of our mental health at the door or parts of our diversity at the door, whatever it may be, into an organization. So providing that support just makes business sense, and that's how I personally see it. So then it swings roundabouts, right? Because I guess my next question would, really to each of you is what do you see are the sort of current and actually the future challenges here?
I don't mind stepping up to that one. I think some of the things that we're going to find is that if companies are kind of adopting this asset light model, in a sense that they're actually losing more people and people are working remotely, what are they doing to keep people engaged, and what are they doing to communicate? Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
In terms of communication, what are they doing in order to communicate properly? What are they doing to engage with people, and what are they doing to collaborate as well? Because I think we all know that brainstorming usually happens best face to face. We can build relationships really well face to face, and the minute you take that away, if you're not creating a very interesting agenda for your colleagues, it can almost become a burden to get onto a Zoom call every morning at 9 o'clock, and it's very unexciting. So I think some of it is just about making sure that you get those engagements, that they're, when opportunity does allow us to, that we are, meeting up under the right circumstances, and brainstorming and really sharing each other's feedback, but not making it something where it becomes across as a burden to the organization or to the employees.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry, Chris.
I would add to that, looking to the future, and I borrow this from the context of travel wellness. Typically, the idea is that there is a duty of care in that space, but the duty of care during the pandemic, in many instances, I heard of it not working out as it could have, or it could have been better. It wasn't quite prepared to deal with the uniqueness of the pandemic. And I know we're on a trajectory to add more technology into our life, but I think technology is part of that answer. It is in the context of people working remotely as well. But in terms of health, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea either, but self-monitoring tools that lift the burden on the infrastructure, either that be medical facilities provided by the company, or those that these people have to go and purchase outside of that. Self-knowledge through the ability to use and leverage technology that is useful and fit for purpose is also an element where people have more control over their day-to-day progression or regression as it is, and can nip it in the bud to help that, to help them and their journey, their health, as much as it is a tool for them to be able to be more productive. And I think that's important, and there's some pushback against that because people either have an aversion to technology or not, but we need to find the middle where we can leverage it for the best of all needs.
And I think too, in the past, a lot of times what I think is happening is that this whole idea of wellness and mental health, nobody really knows where it sits within a company. Is it HR's responsibility? Is it management? Is it leadership? So it kind of gets bounced around. So I think what we're seeing more of now is companies taking on a position of, chief well-being officer. And so I think by isolating and siloing that position with somebody whose expertise is just focused on that, I think that can go a long ways to uniform messaging and kind of getting an idea of what the company needs. Because otherwise, I think a lot of companies are going to pick it up, but then it kind of falls away, or the definitions are, varied from place to place. So that would just be one suggestion I would have, to maybe make it an idea that sticks and moves forward and builds credibility and buy-in by the employees and by management as well.
You've just
Is that your next
responded.
question?
You responded to my next question already, which is great because you read my mind.
Yeah.
And it is so true. But I mean, I personally am seeing a lot of corporations now bring about this particular role, right? I mean, PwC has a lady who is, it's a dual role. So not only is she head of D&I, but she's also managing well-being. I am a firm believer that you can have them solo together, but it might be better off siloing them, separate them, but they have to work together, right? You know, Mask have an individual, again, there's a D&I individual, there's also a person who's a wellbeing officer, right? So I think you're absolutely right, Megan. It is very much, it's business critical, particularly now. So on that question, you know, for the others, you know, what is that one top tip you would give to, you know, an organization to date on this? Who'd like to take that?
I think,
mine's-
oops, I don't know if we can hear Chris. I think it makes sense within the hospitality sector. I mean, my role within Accor was director of well-being, and I managed the well-being brands from a design perspective and from a marketing perspective. But if anyone was really kind of an expert within the company on well-being and well-being programs, it was myself. So working alongside with the talent and culture teams, I think is an incredibly helpful way for companies to be able to kind of merge those two roles and then to be bringing in the diversity and inclusion. And I think what we're going to start to see too is that diversity and inclusion are going to start to shift in a company's values. So we have this set of company values, and I think we're going to start to see, you know, not even as a trend, as something that's there to stay, that diversity is something that's going to replace something else or be added to the other amount of values that a company partakes in.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, and the way I see it, you're absolutely right. I think D&I and employee well-being are intrinsically linked. You know, if you're trying to create an inclusive culture, you want to make sure your workforce, your employees, your workforce who are people, right? They're humans. They are happy being there, and that's critically where this all comes in. Matt, what's your take on this?
It's behind me. We need to talk about mental health, but we need to engage in the right conversations around this, not just as a bit of lip service to a subject that's out there in the market. It's now the reality is time to talk. You know, that's a campaign out here. Small talk saves lives. That's another campaign that we submit, you know, and we support. And it's these small things. The thing we're not very good at is knowing about each other. We're not very good at really getting to know each other. So at work, people just say, I haven't got time to hear about your problems at home. Let's start understanding. We don't have to solve all the problems and fix them. But if somebody's not sleeping well at night, which we know is a serious impact to our mental well-being, if a workplace says, well, that's not my issue, then that's wrong, because it could be their issue, because it might be because of work that they're not sleeping at night. So there is a clearer definition of where work where work starts and stops. We need to be mindful. Who's responsible is still a conversation that needs to take place, because not everybody has the D&I teams and the wellbeing teams and everything else. And if anything, those budgets are being squashed at the moment, because the primary function for most companies is pay staff that we can and retain as many as we can. So we can understand why the budgets aren't just there at the moment. But it is an investment. We didn't talk about return on investment, but I think that's something that has to be factored in. I'm this big fan of think of employees as an asset, not a liability. Right now, people see them as a liability. So what do I do when I'm struggling to pay my debts? I get rid of the liabilities. So people are going. But invest in people. The assets are there. They're going to make you grow. And when things come back, things hopefully will be better. So this is real. This is a conversation we have to keep on having.
Love it. I love that. Think of employees as an asset, right? Because they are. Yeah. They truly are. And I think those organizations that don't, they're the ones, Matt, that are going to get left behind, right? Because you can't think just about the short term. You do have to think about the long term. You know, what we're currently going through in the world, this is going to be over at some point, right? When we're going to look back, we're going to go, what was that all about? And how did my organization look after me? That's what's going to matter. Chris,
and I did want to add one other thing there. Sorry, Debbie, just one thing I didn't get to say, but I wrote it down because I think it's really good. And that's, we've experienced road warriors, and now we're going to get road warriors, and we have to be mindful. People with anxiety is going to be traveling. When this all comes back, that's going to be a reality that a lot of people will be going through. They'll be worried about traveling, and we're asking them to get back on that horse and do it again. And we've got to support them properly.
So true. And Chris, what is your takeaway?
Takeaway: build better cultures in companies, and not just pay lip service to it. That includes, for what's going on now, the diversity and inclusion agenda, and the fact that people run these businesses, and as we've underlined, they are the most valuable asset in these businesses. So we need to really start talking. Again, from the perspective of travel wellness, one of the most frequent complaints is that people don't feel heard while they're on the road doing the business. for the companies or the organizations, and therefore they don't feel valued. So now is a massive opportunity to have honest conversations about where that culture stands, what it can do, and how to improve it. That's the starting point for me. Build a good culture.
Fantastic. For the audience that's watching, Chris is slightly delayed in terms of the speech, etc. But he is in the UK, so it's not a technology
We think
issue.
we think he's in
But
it.
we think exactly. We think. Oh my God! And we are so out of time. I just really want to say, and I want to share some key takeaways with the audience here today. So, for Megan, it was, top-down leadership. Communicate within your business, collaborate, right? Extremely key. And for that is amazing. From Matt, be kind because it doesn't cost, right? Learn to switch off during the day. And this goes back to actually right now what's happening, right? Particularly from a remote working perspective. And we need to talk about mental health. It's on your banner right behind you, right there. Think of your employees as an asset. And from Chris, who looks like he's talking, but he's not. I know. Look at the human being behind the function, and build better culture in companies. I think that is so great. And Lindsay, to finish off, you talked about organizations leading by example, right? And it needs to be, workplace wellness needs to be more authentic, right? So it makes an impact on organizations and companies. And with that, I would like to thank you all. Chris is still talking.
It's been brilliant.
My goodness.
Thank you.
Chris is still talking. We haven't even touched on the ROI piece. Exactly it. We could go on for another.
You have to plan
20
another
minutes.
one, Debbie.
Yeah,
We
it's a big
definitely
topic.
do. This is a big topic. I think we've just lifted the lid off the surface. Not even, 24-hour human, absolutely. And I just, I wish you all a wonderful day. Stay safe. Take care of yourself, those around you. I'd like to thank the audience so much. I'd like to thank Megan, Lindsay, Chris, and Matt. It's been such a pleasure having. You're all experts in your space. And yeah, thank you for being on my panel today. So thank you so much. The next diversity inclusion talk takes place next Thursday, which is on the 12th of November. And that is all about leading through allyship. And in fact, you are all one of them, which is really important. So thank you all so much for tuning in, wherever you're tuning in from. Stay safe and goodbye.
Bye.
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 Bye.